Good morning. I don't know what terrible things you've done in your life up to this point, but clearly your karma's out of balance to get assigned to my class. I am your professor, the living embodiment of that feeling you get when you realize you left the oven on. This is Succession Video Essays 201, or as I prefer to call it, How to Make a Deal with the Devil. Unlike my colleagues, I will not be teaching you how to enjoy the show or study it for its greater themes and influences, but rather how to obsess over it. How to draw outlandish conclusions based on tangentially related media in order to prove a half-baked point about the moral compass of a white man. Today we are talking about the business of cruelty, Faustian bargains, ludicrously capacious bags, and everything in between. This is a 201 class. We are not here to play at the kiddie table. As far as I am concerned, you have already consumed every other piece of Succession-related media on this godforsaken website. You know how good the show is. You've already been told by all of the other creators who put together coherent, easily consumable, well-constructed video essays. You have had your fill of reasonably lengthed quality arguments, and you are here to fucking go nut-nut. And who am I to deny you that? Today, we are going to take 2 shots down the devil's rabbit hole, and we are going to find out what happens on the other side. That said, if you have managed to sneak into my class without being a registered student, without having consumed the prior reading materials, please stay. While I may not be able to go over every single thing that is fantastic about this show, there is one thing that I know for certain. Connor Roy was interested in politics from a very young age. Part 0. We open on a fountain. We open on a fountain. A person sits by said fountain. In the woods, maybe a spooky graveyard or a backyard graveyard. They are lamenting their desires and their predicaments, how they have been smited and how they are misunderstood and undervalued in this world. And then suddenly, a figure appears. Out of nowhere. A very spectacular performance. I'm talking sparkles, glitter, fire, maybe the whole shebang. It's mesmerizing and exciting, and the figure is like, I can give you everything. I can fix all of this for you. And the person says, yes, please, thank you, do that. And they say, great. The only catch is that it all goes away at midnight. Wait, what? So we don't consider Cinderella to be a Faustian bargain. Is that correct? She's not making a deal with the devil. She's quite literally making a deal with the fairy godmother. But that would be far too easy and the video would be over. So, there are obviously some kind of criteria for a devil's bargain beyond magical gifts being bestowed upon someone with a serious catch. Usually that catch is their eternal soul. That's the traditional idea. The Faustian bargain is called that because Dr. Faustus sells his eternal soul to a devil named Mephistopheles in exchange for like hella magical knowledge. Or Dorian Gray, right? They say Dorian Gray sold his soul to the devil, and that way this painting got really old and gross and he stayed young and hot. See, I learned what it was about. People say that Jimi Hendrix made a deal with the devil. A lot of blues musicians actually are accused of having made these deals. Paganini was a violinist that was so good, people said he could have only made a deal with the devil. Encyclopedia Britannica considers it a Faustian bargain to be a pact whereby a person trades something of supreme moral or spiritual importance, such as personal values or the soul, for some otherworldly material benefit, such as knowledge, power, or riches. The concept of a Faustian bargain shows up in its literal devil magic form at least once in pretty much every episodic sci-fi fantasy show. Supernatural has one, Futurama has one. Sometimes it's the backstory for other high-concept fantasy villains, or the offer of the deal is the climax to some journey where the protagonist needs to then prove that they've grown as a person and not take the deal. In life, however, and in more realistic and completely 100% historically accurate stories like 1989's Newsies starring Christian Bale, it's less give me your eternal soul and more do this thing and I will give you a bunch of money. Thus, our colloquial understanding of a deal with the devil has basically come to mean any deal made where there is something gained in exchange for a sacrifice of your morality or principles.
Craig, don't be an asshole. You don't have principles.
When we think of Succession and we think of deals with the devil, we probably think of this scene first.
Will you marry me?
What the fuck? Sorry, hold on.
Do you want a deal with the devil?
There we go. Sorry. But this is Succession, right? There are deals everywhere. The show is swimming in them. Big business deals, small business deals, unspoken deals, backroom deals, shady under the table deals, bullshit deals, and then some. It's a show about an extremely successful business. There is a lot of bargaining happening up in that ivory tower. Ivory Tower. What is it about this deal that makes it a deal with the devil? What makes this deal stand out? Why did the writers highlight this as the deal with the devil? Why does Greg agree to this deal? Is it Greg's deal to agree to in the first place? Is he actually sacrificing anything? Would season 1 Greg have agreed to this deal? What might the show be trying to tell us about choice, agency, power, and sacrifice? How does the show draw from stories of the past to create something contemporary? What kind of bagels did they feed that rabbit? What is the fatal flaw here, and why is it money? Which of the Roys would be most likely to die in a submarine? And why is it Kendall? All of these questions and more may or may not be answered over the course of this video. But first, if we want to understand how entering into such a dangerously compelling dramaturgical pact helps establish Succession as a modern romantic tragedy, we're first gonna have to understand who, or rather what, we are dealing with. Part 1, The Devil and the Doctor. So, Satan. The man, the myth, the ruthless CEO of a media empire. According to religious studies scholar Jeffrey Burton Russell, who once wrote like a 5-volume history on the damn thing, the best way to understand the concept of the devil is through history. When we approach the devil historically, we avoid the faith-based assumptions and influences that come with theologically approaching it. The need for any kind of tangible, repeatable evidence that comes with the scientific approach, it dissipates, right? If we look at the devil historically, we can address the phenomenon itself with the assistance of everything from mythology to literature to theology and beyond. The devil, as we'll come to understand them, comes in many forms. The devil exists historically as a long-lived and immensely influential concept aimed at the truth about evil. Evil. Oof, that's a big word. Sure hope we don't completely sidestep that foundationally important definition. When we talk about deals with the devil and Faustian bargains, we are more often than not talking about the explicitly Christian idea of Satan, or the devil with a capital D. This is really important to know because even though these stories and references to the devil might not be in themselves explicitly Christian or even intentionally religious, 99.9% of the time, the devil that is being referenced is some form of the Christian one, because the Christians did that thing where they took over various countries and all but wiped out their native religions and forced citizens to practice Christianity, which we don't approve of, just for the record. Well, I am not a practicing Christian of any kind, and we aren't going to be diving into the devil as much more than like a narrative symbol today, because it is so explicitly tied to Christianity, and because we talk about Christianity a lot on this channel. I like to be kind of open and clear about my biases. So, for context, I was raised Catholic in the United States. I'm not practicing any religion of any kind at the moment, but most of my religious and theological study has been in Christianity, specifically Catholicism, using the Christian Bible, usually the St. James if you're curious. But I also have the internet. So, on that note, I am about to mention the word Hebrew. That is strictly because that is the language that the Christian Old Testament was originally written in by Christians as they reinterpreted parts of the Hebrew Bible, which is a different thing. We're only going to talk about it for like 2 seconds, but I was both unclear and misinformed in my last video, 2 terrible things to be, and that hurt people when I was kind of discussing religion and the Christian perspective on those early texts, and I am very sorry about that. I didn't get to say it in video form yet. I make no claims about Judaism or the Jewish faith or any other faith really beyond Christianity and Catholicism, and even that I'm not practicing, so take everything that I have to say with a grain of salt of the earth. And as usual, feel free to put your perspectives and enlighten me in the comments, because the people who did correct me and bring their experiences forward on the last videos were very, very kind and respectful and very informative. You guys are so smart. So that said, back to Satan, the Christian figure, the fallen angel, whatever you would like to call him back in the Old Testament, which is not the Hebrew Bible at all. First things first is that he is not intrinsically evil. He does not even start out that way. He starts out kind of like any other angel up there in God's, heavenly court, just like living his life with, Michael and Gabriel and Aziraphale and all that stuff. The word Satan is actually the English transliteration of the Hebrew word for adversary. Transliteration, not translation. It is the process of transferring a word from the alphabet of one language to the alphabet of another. So the sound is relatively similar. It is the same word, but it's like if you have one black and white picture and one colored picture, and you take an element from the colored picture and you move it into the black and white picture, desaturated so it blends in. That is translation. You have taken something from the colored picture and made it fit in with the form of the black and white picture. If you take something from the colored picture and you plop it right on top of the black and white picture and it makes sense in the image, but it's the only thing in color, that's a transliteration. It happens a lot with religious stuff because so many of the religious texts are so old. So the transliteration of Satan as we see it in the Bible, as far as I could tell from my research, includes the definite article, making it the adversary or the accuser, and it's like a job. Some of the sources I found use the word accuser, some of them use adversary, but translation is a very messy thing. Anything you're reading in translation you have to take with like 100 pounds of salt. Either way, this Satan is like top prosecuting attorney, right? The Satan, the adversary, the accuser, shows up in the book of Job, gathers the sons of God, also known as angels, to basically accuse Job of being a
Panic Meister, cooking up his sweaty spaghetti.
And then he just basically roams the earth, right? Looking for, bad apples. So we're not in Prince of Darkness territory just yet. And it kind of stays that way for a long time, storytelling wise, right? He's not really the main character. The drawings vary in degrees of scariness, particularly after Dante's Inferno comes out. They do get a bit scarier, because Dante's Inferno has the devil at the gates of hell eating people. That's a whole other thing. That's the vibe, right? Generally not a great dude, but also not particularly interesting. Yes, he's a bit of a bummer, but he's still kind of just doing his job, burning sinners alive and being the antithesis to Christ, And once we get into the Renaissance and the 16th century England specifically, Reformation after Restoration after Reforestation, schisms galore, it's basically war between the Catholics and the Protestants, combined with all of that Christian mysticism that we talked about last time. There was a lot of debate over basically whether magic was real. They will tell you that it was about transmutation and the spiritual ability of man, but it's magic. They're talking about magic. We're burning witches at the stake. Witches who were admittedly mostly just normal people who were vibing, but to each their own. All of this is happening though, and suddenly the devil becomes very useful. The devil now becomes a very powerful tool in this war between the Catholics and the Protestants. The Catholics are doing exorcisms where the demons just so happen to be spouting off specifically Protestant ideas. Lutherans are disseminating devil books about the devil and all of his various vices like sex and fun and Catholicism. Anyway, amongst all of this madness, in about 1587, Johann Spice, this guy, he publishes. So the original German chapbook was actually written anonymously and published by Johann. It's called Historia von die Faustus, and Johann Spiess just sort of published it, and thus forth. AKA the history of the damnable life and deserved death of Dr. Faustus, AKA Faust book. Here's how it goes down. Dr. Faustus wants to be smarter than everybody else. And so he goes to a crossroads. Keep that in your little brain. In the middle of the night, and starts like drawing runes. Magical circles and symbols, and he's trying to invoke one of these evil spirits in the Bible, Beelzebub specifically. Instead, he gets Mephistopheles, who has to go and get permission from his boss, Lucifer, in order to help Faust, which he does. Faust signs his name in blood, and voila, it's done. That's how you do it. End of video. Only no, because this story catches like wildfire. It becomes like the idea that can't be killed, right? It is wild how fast this thing spreads. It becomes a central cautionary tale, and the nature of making Faust like an intellectual seeker, which there are arguments is a bit of a translation thing, vibes really, really well with Protestant England. Punishing someone for their pursuit of knowledge, very in line with the anti-scholastic mission of the Protestants. Because despite constantly disseminating pamphlets for people to read, they were not super big on knowledge. God, I wish I knew why. Anyway, The Damnable History and Deserved Death of Dr. Faustus is a smashing hit. Everybody loved this book. It vilifies knowledge, dark magic, sex, Helen of Troy. So it's translated into English very quickly, at which point it ends up in the hands of one Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe is Diet Shakespeare. He is the almond milk to Shakespeare's oat milk. He is the Biz Barkley to your CJBX. He is just a room to Shakespeare's Panic Room. I don't make the rules.
A person can fit through there. A person can definitely fit through that window. A small person, an attack child.
He basically writes his own version of the Faust tale in the form of a play, only he calls it The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. Why is this important? What in God's name does this have to do with Succession? It's important because nobody said that Dr. Faustus' story was tragic. Damnable, yes. Deserved, sure, but tragic? Since when is selling your soul for some shit that you knew you weren't supposed to want in the first place a tragedy? Part 4. Shibby's Choice. We can't do the shoes anymore. I'm in my own home. If we want to know why Marlowe may have called Faust a tragedy, and we are not satisfied with he wanted to, then we are going to need to take a little detour away from the devil and right down tragedy lane. We can circle back to Faust later. Maybe. I don't know. Who cares? We're all gonna die anyway. Right? Because that's how tragedies work. They don't end well, ever. And they're tragic because we know that they're not going to end well, ever. Everyone in Hamlet ends up dead. R&J, dead. Antigone, dead. Agamemnon, dead. Electra, dead? Dead, or at the very least sad. Oedipus, dead for all intents and purposes. And so on, and so on, and so on. There are not many of these plays that get titled tragedy that don't end with a pile of bodies on the stage. Trust me, I paid more money than I would like to admit learning how to do tragedies on stage. I played Juliet. You want to see 17-year-old me playing Juliet? Back to the point, these tragedies, right, these plays that get labeled tragedy, they also share a lot of similar themes, right? Justice, familial ties, feudal relations, succession. See? It only took us 25 minutes? That's not bad. If you were on TikTok or Twitter within like 24 hours of the Succession finale airing, you probably saw or had some kind of interaction with a video like this. For a show that is so heavily compared to Shakespeare, I was actually kind of surprised to see so many of these Greek tragedies being brought up. And a lot of them have these quotes with varying levels of accuracy from a handful of plays, a couple from Antigone, some Oedipus. Mostly you'll see, though, a lot of quotes referencing the Oresteia, which is a series of 3 plays by Aeschylus, who this time I'm certain wrote plays. And they chronicle like the House of Atreus, which is like a whole Greek mythology thing. But basically it has Electra in it. It's not called Electra. Sophocles wrote Electra. It's confusing. We'll get to it. I actually won a bunch of awards as a teenager for doing monologues from The Murder at Argos, which was a modernized version of the Oresteia, and Morning Comes Electro. I did a scene with my lovely friend Danae. I don't think Danae was watching this, but if she is, we were fabulous. And it was my pride and joy, and I peaked. I peaked in high school, is what I'm telling you. Peaking in high school is bad, but peaking in high school as a theater kid. Why did Marlowe decide that Faust's story was a Greek tragedy? He didn't. He just decided it was a tragedy. I'm putting words in his mouth. Why did he decide that Faust's story was tragical, at the very least? What are the elements of tragedy that we see in traditional Greek tragedies and the story of Dr. Faustus and his encounter with the devil Mephistopheles? Specifically, the encounter as it is told by Christopher Marlowe, because I don't want to confuse you too much, and also mentioning Goethe's Faust at this moment is antithetical to my point. We're cherry-picking data. We're gonna get to Goethe. I got the whole book. I got the physical book. We'll get to him, but not yet. We're dressing up the numbers. Yeah, talk about the numbers. We'll iron that out when we get to it. We can fight it out. It'll be fun. So, tragedy. Etymology. Etymology is... no one super knows. I mean, I'm sure somebody knows or thinks they know at the very least, and they'll definitely comment about it, so you can go down to find out. But from what I can find, it might mean something like Song of the Goats or satyrs, which would be super fun and convenient for us because satyrs are the goat human creatures with the boners that Christians will eventually turn into images of the devil. But also it might just mean we love beer. For historical context, basically, Greek plays were kind of done at like a 3-day festival. They did a bunch of sad ones, and then they did a fun one that they called the satyr play, and it was like the comedy, and it was a whole thing. Regardless, we just don't really know the origins of Greek tragedy in general because there aren't that many records of it. We don't know a lot, but we do know that there is stuff that we don't know. Which is some shit that Sophocles said one time. Put a pin in that. Now, we know how tragedies are going to end, right? They are going to end poorly. They may have not been titled The Tragedy of Clytemnestra, but it was pretty clear what was going to go down, right? For a number of reasons. Many of them being that these were retellings of mythology and religious stories of the time and things that everybody knew the gist of. And we still know the gist, right? Medea is gonna kill those kids every time. Every time. Every time. And if she doesn't, then some shit is going down and this is a rewrite, and then it's not really Medea, is it? It's just a woman who got cheated on and is mad about it, which is fair, but it's not Medea. If you're seeing a retelling of a tragedy and they do change the ending, that change still plays explicitly on the shock value of you being surprised that the ending is different, which makes the expected, intended outcome vital and just as important as the new altered outcome. If Juliet wakes up 5 minutes earlier, then it's not a tragedy, it's a triumph. It's a successful story. They did the thing. It's a Hercules, right? It's a hero's journey. It's suspenseful, but it is ultimately 10 out of 10. They can run away. It's gonna be great. That would be sick. That would be amazing. But it wouldn't be Romeo and Juliet, and it wouldn't be a tragedy. But Christopher Marlowe's Faust is a tragedy, and Succession is a tragedy. Kendall Roy plots to take over as CEO of Waystar Royco 4 times over the course of 4 seasons of Succession. And he fails every single time. The first thing that we ever see Kendall do is fail to acquire a business. And then it just keeps happening. Shiv Roy starts out barely tolerating her wet noodle husband and then ends the show barely tolerating her wet noodle husband. Roman Roy starts out as a little weirdo and ends as a little weirdo. Very little actually changes for any of these characters throughout the show except for the fact that their dad dies and Connor gets married. Those happen in the same episode, by the way. A watching experience that I can only compare to having witnessed the fight scene at the end of Breaking Dawn Part 2 at the midnight premiere of Breaking Dawn Part 2 on November 12th in 2012. It was that for an hour. I got more wine. They filmed this episode, or at least like this sequence, by the way, of all the kids finding out that their dad was dying on an airplane during Connor's wedding, like a play, right? They filmed it consistently. They had a bunch of different cameras rolling with different rolls of film. It was very complicated. You can watch the behind the scenes and they'll tell you how they did it. But a lot of really long, full takes of that whole thing. They did that for like multiple scenes and episodes, because even writing the most 2023 show you could possibly write about billionaires running the world, a show allegedly based on the lives of people who were still alive, even then it seems like there's this instinctive understanding that the story leans into the dramatic, the classical, the performance and structure. It was necessary to embrace that, to tell this story, even though it was very much a modern story.
Just like in Hamlet. If that happens in Hamlet, I don't care.
So Aristotle had some opinions on theater and tragedy, and one of those opinions was that the hero of the tragedy would always start in a place of nobility and prosperity and high rank, and then he would fall due to a fatal flaw, and he would fall into ruin and, the dumps. He worded it better than I did, but also he wasn't actually fully right. Not even in his day were all of the heroes technically fitting that pattern. But turns out the man never wrote any plays himself anyway, so fuck him. I mean, I fucking love it, but that's my honest opinion. Anyway, start out in a place of nobility. Shit happens. There's denouements and all that other stuff, blah, blah, blah. You can Google it. We are more than off the tracks enough. We're not getting into it. We are, however, going to get into the most famous watching a train wreck tragedy that there is.
You and Kendall are thinking of killing your dad? That's a little Greek tragedy.
Yeah, Oedipus.
Oedipus, also known as Oedipus the King or Oedipus Rex, whichever, the one where he's not at Colonus, okay? That one. The only one that anybody cares about. So Oedipus is king at the start of the play. Not many people realize, myself included, that he is already king when the play starts. He's already king because the old king got murdered somewhere. We don't know. And now Oedipus is king. And there's like a plague of both your cities. I mean, it's just the one, but there's a plague, okay? There's a plague, and he's trying to figure out how to solve the plague. So he's like, I'm gonna do the reasonable thing, which is go to a prophet. And the prophet is like, if you want to solve your plague, you're gonna have to solve the murder of the previous king. This seems easy enough. So Oedipus goes to like another prophet, I think. And he's like, who killed the king? And the prophet's like, didn't you do it? Which is like a super offensive thing to hear if you're Oedipus, right? Because you definitely didn't kill this king. But it's not a big deal if you're, his wife, Queen Jocasta, because she's like, babes, don't worry about it. Prophets are bullshit. Crypto is a scam. They once told us that our baby was going to grow up and kill his father and marry his mother, and that definitely didn't happen because we definitely killed that baby, and then Laos died like way after at like a crossroads somewhere. Don't worry about it. This does not put Oedipus at ease, right? Because before he and Jocasta got married and had 4 children, a lot of children, they have lots of children, he like totally killed a guy on a crossroads one time, which on its own is not a big deal, except for the fact that he was only on those crossroads because he was running away from home, because he found out that he was prophesized to kill his father and marry his mother. And it's not looking good. Spoiler alert, if you don't know, it was totally Oedipus who killed the previous king, who happened to be his father, and married his mother, and then had 2 incest babies who are then going to go on to have equally terrible lives. And Oedipus himself will be so mortified by the whole thing that he will blind himself, which definitely gets a pin. And we all learned a valuable lesson that day, which is that if you want a job done right, you better do it yourself and make sure that baby is
I should have had dogs.
No, the lesson that we learn is about fate. And where there is discussion of fate, there is discussion of agency. Trust me, I am on many of their watch lists. Agency, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is in very general terms that an agent is a being with the capacity to act, and agency denotes the exercise or manifestation of this capacity. Basically, an agent is one that can, agency is the canning, doing, kenning. When you're telling us stories about fate with your prophecies and your gods and goddesses, the question, of course, comes up, is there agency? He wouldn't have been on those crossroads if he wasn't trying to actively avoid ending up on those crossroads. But how was he to know? Seriously.
Did I say that I was going to fuck Marcia? No. Although I definitely would. Because she's hot, but that's, that's like phase 2.
We put a pin in crossroads earlier because crossroads are a very big thing symbolically. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood and all of that. But they don't just call them crossroads. Sophocles makes it a point to describe this crossroads as a place where 3 roads meet. And this is important because you can't actually come to a crossroads, to a fork in the road where you have 2 choices without coming from somewhere else. There is, in every choice that you think you're making between 2 options, a third option that you can't see because it's behind you, because you're not a bird. A bird, bird's eye view, or I guess me, right? I can see all 3 because I'm not in it. The mistake that Oedipus is making when he leaves home to avoid killing his father is thinking that he sees the whole picture, believing himself to be fully autonomous, to have full agency, believing that he has control over his fate. He sees himself as being detached from the story that he's told. Either he only sees 2 possible options, or he thinks that he knows what the third one was. He doesn't see himself as ingratiated into and part of a story that is already being told. Let me get the pointer. Because the decision that Oedipus was making at the crossroads is the decision that he did not know he was making. This is an important concept because characters in Succession do this all the time. All the time. They assume that they have all of the information that they need. They assume that they have full agency. They think that they have full control over their lives when they simply do not. At the end of season 3 of Succession, Siobhan Roy, our resident self-destructive baddie, finds herself at her own Oedipal crossroads because for businessy reasons that don't matter, one thing led to another, and Kendall Roy is yet again trying to weasel his way into the head of Waystar Royco. Waystar Royco is their business, by the way. I don't know if I told you that, but you should know. It was on the required reading. Anyway, Kendall is trying to take down their father yet again, and so Siobhan finds herself having to decide between supporting her brothers and standing by her father. While she is at this crossroads, she makes a phone call. She makes a phone call to her husband, Tom Wambsgans. There's going to be a lot of what appears to be Tom hate in this video. I don't hate Tom. We're playing devil's advocate. And she calls Tom and she tells him what is going on. That her and the boys are planning to do some businessy things and overthrow their father. She sees herself as making one choice between her brothers and her father. What she does not see is where Tom has come from in order to get to those crossroads. She doesn't see that Tom has spent 3 seasons having his wife, who he loves, just belittle him, turn their marriage into a joke, nearly let him go to prison, nearly let him drink toilet wine, got a dog that she doesn't take care of. I don't think she takes care of that fucking dog. Refuse his shoulder massages, and not be mad that he swallowed his own load. That's where Tom is coming from. Not to mention trying to claim the job that he has been after, that they basically agreed they were both gonna try and get for him.
Because I thought that it was something that we wanted for me
We do.
to have it.
We do.
That was just the plan.
But she's Siobhan Roy, and she doesn't see fucking any of that. Because anybody who saw any of that would not have done any of that, okay? All that she thinks is going on is she's choosing between her brothers and her father, because the world revolves around Siobhan Roy. Only we, the audience, are aware of what Tom has been up to, and we know what Tom chooses at the crossroads. We know what Tom decides.
Do you want to come with me? Spores?
Can I ask for a little more information?
No. Don't think so.
But Shiv doesn't find out until it's too late. Now, why in God's name Tom would choose to show his face at this moment is beyond me. But dramaturgically, it totally makes sense. Because, like, Oedipus is already king when the play starts. The whole thing is just us watching him figure out what the hell is going on. We don't need to see the murder of the previous king or the marriage to Jocasta or the birth of their incest babies. We just need to see him figuring it out. So Tom needs to come back so that we can see the moment that Shiv puts together all of the things that have happened. The moment that Shiv realizes she made a choice that she didn't know she was making. We need to see that moment so that we can pity her and fear that we could become her and have catharsis, because that's what Aristotle said we should do. But not every single choice in a tragedy is a sort of backdoor decision that leads to your inevitable doom. Sometimes it's the front door. Part 3, what do I know? So, like, Shiv might not know all of the details of everything going on at that crossroads, but, like, Tom definitely does. He calls this the deal with the devil, so evidently he has some understanding of the fact that the choice that he is making is going to greatly impact the rest of his life. He knows that he is making a big D decision. There's no way that he's stupid enough to think that Shiv is never gonna find out, right? She's Siobhan Roy, and he's making a deal with her father, who is about to totally fuck her life up. There's absolutely no way that he thought he would just get away with this forever. So he knows that he's pretty much sacrificing his marriage, right? Her trust at the very least, if he ever had it to begin with. And he's doing all of this in exchange for Logan's gratitude, basically, for the chance to kind of be in his good graces and the presumed protection that doing Logan a big ass solid like this will grant him. And he's kind of right. You know, I get it. I get where he's coming from, because if the kids had succeeded in their big, we're gonna business the fuck out of this business and win, or whatever was going on at the end of season 3, there's no way that Tom would have been CEO, right? Like, there's no way he would have been anything other than Shiv's, like, bootlicker. She could eat him alive in her sleep if she wanted. Poor Tom. And we know that he wants to be CEO. We know that he's always wanted that. And we know that him and Shiv talked about it beforehand, and that was like a plan of theirs, right? He says, I thought we wanted this for me. And she's like, well, we did until it got offered to me.
Me is just a modification of the plan.
No, sure. It's quite a big modification, but
Which was not something that was ever going to be in the cards and shouldn't have been in the cards, but we will get to that later. Point is, this is Tom's deal with the devil, and he asks Greg to be his Sporus, right? I asked at the beginning if this was even Greg's deal. It's not. Spoiler alert, it's not. It's Tom's deal. He just asks Greg to help him. He asks Greg to be his Sporus and to kind of come down this dark path and go down this road and be my pal.
I might need you as my attack dog.
Right.
Like Greg Weiler.
He is the one that knows the secret. He's the only one with any power in this situation. He's the only one who can actually make the deal. And unfortunately, we don't get to see this. We don't get to see Tom, like, standing at a crossroads, drawing runes in the sand and trying to summon Logan Roy with, like, used women's underwear. We do get to see Faust do it, though. Per the 1592 Christopher Marlowe mix, we get to see Faust be like, hey, audience, I'm just too smart. I've learned all the shit. I know all the things. Should I magic? And all of his scholarly friends are like, no. And all of his magician friends are like, yeah. And in case that wasn't clear enough, he then gets like a good angel who comes to visit him and is like, don't do this. I don't think you should do this. The good angel is evidently very bad at his job because like 2 minutes later, the bad angel comes and is like, I think you should do it. And Faust is like, you make a great point, and goes off to like learn devil magic. He learns how to conjure himself a devil, or rather, he thinks he does. Faust is pretty certain that he used his like super magic ability to call Mephistopheles to him. And he's also pretty certain that when Mephistopheles is like, I am your slave, that he's like telling the truth. No. Mephistopheles has just been hanging around, like waiting for someone who's dumb enough to do this. That said, however, we're like reasonably sure that Faust was a real person. To some extent, right? There's like reasonable-ish evidence to support the idea that he like was a person. There like was a dude named Faust running around with like a creepy little friend performing magical feats and like taking people's money. There are some rumors that this person made some deals with the devil, which is like a very real concern at the time. We talk about musicians today who may or may not have made deals with the devil, but it's not the same. No one is trying to burn Bob Dylan at the stake. At least not hard enough. They weren't sending people to the gallows because they were getting Hogwarts letters, okay? They did it because, well, full disclosure, they did it because they didn't like you. That's the real reason. They didn't like somebody because you were, you know, a woman or disabled or mentally ill or living your life, okay? You would just be existing, and then one day they would be like, you renounced Jesus for the Antichrist. And you'd be like, I didn't do that. They'd be like, that's exactly what you would say if you did do that. Burn him! We're getting to the point where I'm a little too drunk to keep going, but you'd probably get a trial first. And at this trial, they would tell you that you did all kinds of things like rendering people impotent, killing cattle, or inventing AI. Topical.
Ooh, race relations, kale.
And certainly God wouldn't give you the power to do those things because those things are evil things. Also, this is not a transaction. You don't get a say when you're dealing with the Christian God. We're not trading candy on Halloween here. The terms and conditions for a Christian miracle are far more complicated than sacrifice your daughter and I'll get your ships to Troy. Christian God would never. Trust me. In my personal experience, God tends to be a little bit less than supportive when it comes to cursing an ex's bloodline for the next 1,000 years. So we need to think a little bit outside the garden. Faustus, who wants to understand the metaphysics of the universe so bad so he can figure out how to live forever in his physical body, even if it is in hell, he goes and he summons himself a devil. He thinks he does. Geoffrey Russell writes, given the anti-scholastic bias of the Protestant Reformation, it was natural that the Faust book should make the figure of the man who sells his soul to Satan as a scholar. Faust desires to obtain knowledge by his own efforts rather than to receive it by grace.
So what are you going to do?
I don't know. Because anyone I ask for advice, I make complicit. If you know about this stuff, you should tell. But you can't because you're going to spread the virus.
So the characters in Succession hoard knowledge. They hoard knowledge like it is the last box of Twinkies at the apocalypse. They are obsessed with it. They gorged themselves on it. They sit on it like it is a dragon's egg. It's understood by everyone that knowledge is a very, very powerful tool and that it is also intrinsically dangerous. It is a weapon. And we're not talking about academic knowledge. It's not books or equations. It's not knowledge that you get from life experience even. It is specifically the knowledge about the movements of other people. It's omniscience that they're after. That is what they value. They want to be omniscient, all-knowing, to know everything that is going on all the time.
Information.
No guarantee.
Greg,
Results.
it's like a bottle of fine wine.
Written on it, posted on
You store it, You hoard it.
While we are
Save it for a special occasion. And then you smash someone's fucking face at one.
respondents. So what we
They're also particularly interested in knowing how and what someone is going to do, how someone is going to vote, who someone is going to side with, who they are going to betray, and who they have on their side at any given moment. Because if you know everything, then you can control everything. There are multiple arcs throughout the show where the characters are spending time calculating who is going to vote which way in various business votes. There's the vote of no confidence in season 1, where everything hinges on whether or not Kendall and friends feel they can guarantee certain individuals to vote a certain way. They vote to go private in season 2. They're all running around trying to figure out who can vote for what and who they have on what side and how they can bargain with them. Obviously, there's the big betrayal at the end of season 3 is only possible because Tom tells Logan the kid's plan and he is able to finagle the votes around on his end. And the final vote at the end of season 4 entirely hinges upon Shiv voting the way that the boys want her to. And if there is one thing that Siobhan Roy is not going to do, it is whatever the men closest to her want her to do.
Who are you?
I'm Shiv fucking Roy.
When Tom gets made head of cruises in the beginning of season 1, one of the first things that happened is the previous head of cruises is like, hey, do you want to know the bad stuff? And I would say that he red pill, blue pilled him, but we can't do that anymore because the manosphere fucking ruined that reference. Tom is very smart, and so part of him is I am going to be way better off if I don't know this, because this puts me in a place where I am liable for whatever that bad stuff is, because now I know about it and now it's my job. But Tom also knows the value of knowledge in this world that he is living in, and he is greedy and he is prideful and he is ambitious, and he decides that he does want to know on the off chance that this will benefit him in the long run, which...
You call Lester McClintock Mo. Why?
Shiv also doesn't want to know the terrible thing. Not until she thinks it can benefit her, right? Not until she needs ammunition, she needs knowledge. Then all of a sudden she really does think that she should know what's going on.
Here's the situation. I know all about the Cruise Division horror show and the cover-up.
Thomas Gould writes in The Innocence of Oedipus and the Nature of Tragedy, sometimes it is suggested to not focus on the plot of Oedipus, but the self-blinding, prove that the tragedy is not about the crimes he committed, but rather his achieving excellence and identity and self-realization by choosing to blind himself as punishment. Call it the story of a man's brave pursuit of knowledge, or self-knowledge, or identity, whatever that is, under the blows of misfortune. Knowledge has always been dangerous, and it has always been in the devil's wheelhouse. It wasn't a bird and the tree of ignorance that got us into this mess in the first place, was it? Look, it is not explicitly mentioned that the devil with a capital D is the snake in the Garden of Eden, but he's the snake in the Garden of Eden. At least as that story was interpreted by Christians, and at least for our purposes of trying to understand the devil as a broad concept in the collective consciousness of society in the year of our Lord 2023. He's the snake. But technically speaking, Jesus never came out and was like, hey, you know that bit with the snake? Yeah, that's actually an old coworker of mine. Super weird coincidence. His name is Satan. He was really sad, but also kind of hot in like a Timothée Chalamet meets the Ghost Whisperer kind of way. You know who did though? Part 4, dude, where's my paradise? In about 1667, English poet and world-class Christian John Milton publishes his magnum opus, Paradise Lost. It is a 10, sometimes 12-book epic poem with over 10,000 lines of verse depicting Satan's fall from heaven and what is essentially an emotional bender that he goes on spiraling off afterwards. afterwards. There are other bits in there, stuff about Adam and Eve and God and heaven and blah, 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 but none of it matters because John Milton made the devil hot. That's all that matters. Nobody cares about anything else, I'm sorry. Anybody who tells you they care about the other parts of Paradise Lost is lying to you. John Milton made the devil hot, if nothing else in vibe alone, because we won't really get like sexy Satan until William Blake does the illustrations for Paradise Lost in 1808. And it is all downhill from there. But the seeds for that, the seeds for sexy Satan are planted here. Prior to Paradise Lost, the devil was tempting, sure. Enticing, yeah. Intriguing, maybe. But in like a watching a train wreck kind of way. You stared at the devil the same way you stare at a deer that is off to the side of the road. Like, it could kill you, you could kill it, but like, hopefully you'll both just steer clear. That was the general vibe. And then John Milton rocks up like,
this horror will grow mild, this darkness light. Besides what hope the never-ending flight of future days may bring, what chance, what change, worth waiting.
I'm sorry, excuse me for writing anything. Anyway, Paradise Lost was very inspired by the Greek tragedies and other epic poems of like Virgil and Homer. Only John Milton was hella Christian. So he kind of set out on like a little mission, and he ends up with what we would call a theodicy. The vindication of divine goodness and providence in the view of the existence of evil. Evil, remember, is, and this evil is kind of a problem, right? You might even call it a problem of evil. And it's not just a thing that Christians deal with. It actually has its roots in ancient Greece. Any belief system that has a good and powerful deity is probably going to have this problem. Epicurus, I don't know, was an ancient Greek philosopher, and he notices this problem, right? He notices this problem of evil, and he lays it out in the sort of philosopher way, which is a logical argument. Logical arguments are those things that we always talk about in the ethics section. This is not the ethics section, but we always talk about them in the ethics section. They are like, if X, then Y, therefore Z. Premises, if this premise is true, then this is the solution. And usually there's a third one that's like, therefore, no. Contrary to all evidence ever collected in the history of philosophy, philosophers do, in fact, want to make sure we are all on the same page and understanding what we're talking about. They're just very bad at it. So the logical argument for the problem of evil that Epicurus comes up with is this. Premise 1. If an omnipotent, which means all-powerful, omnibenevolent, which just means all good, and omniscient, which means all-knowing, God exists, then evil does not, because he could like poof it all away. Premise 2, there is in fact evil in the world. Hate to break it to you. The world sucks. And it sucked back then too. And the conclusion of these two premises is that therefore an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient God does not exist. How do you like them apples? This problem drives people crazy for the rest of time. Now, there's a couple of things you can do if you want to solve this problem of evil, right? You can chuck out premise 2 if you want to open up that can of worms and let it eat you alive, be my guest. Or you can take the coward's way out and change the lyric to he was a moth to the flame and she's holding the matches. Sorry, I mean, you can try and change premise 1 to explain that a good God could actually allow evil, and here is why. At which point, the devil becomes very handy. Russell writes, Milton's theodicy combines the free will argument with soul-making. God created the world good. Moral goodness is impossible without free will. Humans and angels are free to choose evil. Some do so. God's providence, turning all to good, makes our fall the occasion for teaching us wisdom through trials and suffering. And it really does take 10,000 lines of verse to do this in Milton's defense. Luckily for you, that is not why we're here. However, we are here to talk about the legacy of Paradise Lost so that maybe we can start talking about Succession again, which means we can do the Cliff Notes. We meet our main man, Satan, on media res, which means in the middle of shit, right after he and his pals have lost that war that they waged against heaven. And now they are kind of banished to hell together forever. Satan is like, hey, it's fine. We're gonna get really into DIY architecture. We're gonna build cities. We're gonna change the world, okay? Not to be deterred from his original mission, however. Satan decides that he is going to fuck with God's new creation, mankind. He's going to do this by bribing a cherub, which is like a baby angel, to let him into the Garden of Eden so that he can convince Eve to eat the apple and give humanity sin forever. It's a tragedy about Satan. We all know what's going down. We're not going to get a new ending to the story. What we are going to get is possibly an explanation, which turns out is daddy issues, I guess. Kendall Roy.
Yo.
We meet Kendall Roy and media res, which means in the middle of shit. That might be a bit of a stretch, but we're going for it. In the first episode, he is on his way to this big business meeting that he is going to lose because he is fooling himself. But we will get there. As the pilot progresses, we find out a bunch of things about Kendall Roy. We find out about his family, the central players of this story. We learn who his father is. We learn who his siblings are. We find out he's divorced. And we find out that he was supposed to be announced, but then he wasn't.
But you're not. What?
Which would have been a huge bummer. Luckily for him, however, his dad has like a brain hemorrhage or something. So he gets to be in charge briefly, just long enough to fuck it all up, be pushed immediately back out as soon as his father is back to operating capacity. He spirals into drug abuse, tries to push his father out of the company, fails, spirals into much sadder drug abuse, tries to push his father out of the company, fails, continues with his drug abuse in a less obnoxious way, tries to push his father out of the company, briefly succeeds, and then...
I'm the eldest boy!
Kendall Roy is not the eldest boy. If you are one of the people who did not watch the show, he is literally not. He's just not. He's the second eldest boy. Also, there's only one not boy, and she's younger than him. So it's very weird that he even specified. But for some reason, this idea of being the eldest boy is very, very important to him. So important to him that it doesn't matter if it's even true or relevant. And it's important to him because of something called feudal rights. Waystar Royco, the Roy family, they operate under a very feudal structure. Feudal just means like kings and queens and shit. When we are talking about feudal rights, we are talking about succession with a lowercase s. Who deserves what under that system? Who takes over when the king dies? Who has a right to the throne, to the troops, to the land, to the power, the money, all of that. What Kendall is upset about here is the same thing that Satan is upset about when he started that war. It is a violation of his feudal rights. Something that he should have gotten, but didn't. And these feudal rights are eternally at odds with familial passions. The harsh control of the court or the state, whatever you want to call it, fighting against the constant wild card that is the bloodline. And it is the bloodline, right? Even in 2023 Succession, it is the bloodline. Tom is willing to be a Roy because he wants to be more closely associated with that bloodline. That is how rich their blood is, literally. Greg's blood gets him further than any business degree ever could have, and he doesn't even have the last name. One of the reasons that there's so much tragedy in these Greek tragedies is that they're all just so fucking related. They're so related. And unfortunately, unlike Succession, Oedipus's two sons, Eteocles and Polynices, were twins. So there was no eldest boy to take over when Oedipus blinded himself and hobbled off into the woods in the middle of the night. So they did the only thing that they could do, which was fight to the death and kill each other. They both died. This prompts Oedipus's brother-in-law Creon, to take the throne and start Antigone, which is one of Oedipus's incest babies, whole story. She's got a whole play to her own name, and it's a nightmare all on its own. All that to say that this also happens in Paradise Lost. Angels and Satan might not be explicitly family in the human earthly sense, but they were made by God, the Almighty, as Milton calls them, and one of them does get called Son with a O and a capital S. Satan starts a war with God because God promoted his son to a station above him. That's the reason. That's why he did it. Nepotism caused the fall of man. Jesus really is just a Nepo baby. There are no fucking daughter angels out there. What say you to that, Lord? So, like, I get why he's mad, but technically speaking, the naming of the son to be the son doesn't really affect Satan's life at all. It doesn't affect his job. It doesn't affect his station. It doesn't affect the structure of the heavenly court, whatever is going on up there. It really doesn't matter, but he feels slighted and hurt, and like something that should have rightfully been his was taken from him.
Now things are getting shaken up. Would you come inside?
Dad, I'm not just playing with the politics.
Oh, no, of course.
Shiv was never really involved in the company. She was never really in the running to be the CEO. She wasn't even working for the company when her father offered her the CEO spot in season 2. And yet, when it doesn't work out, even though her life stays exactly the same structurally, she feels betrayed emotionally. That is the dichotomy. The structure of the court and the state and the world, whatever, and the passion, the families, the emotions, all of that stuff. It's not rational for her to be this upset over this turn of events. Because it's family, right? Family instinctively and conceptually resists rationality. It's so emotional. It's so uncontrollable. Family gets under your skin like nothing else because it is your skin. And that's for better or worse. Whether you know and love your family or not, that knife is gonna twist different. Because we get to choose what we do with our bodies, but we don't get to choose who makes our bodies. And because of that tension, everything is awful all the time. The collateral damage of that time that my sister punched me in the face because she wanted to use the car, minimal. If anything, you laughed. The collateral damage, however, of Creon favoring one of his nephews in death over the other, different story. The collateral damage of Logan Roy letting his horribly unqualified children work at the company that runs the news cycle of the world in the first place, different story. Think about all of the people that got fired from Vaulter as a result of Kendall and Roman and Logan being in a power play. The woman that Shiv convinces not to come forward with her assault story at their company, probably everyone Roman Roy has ever spoken to. These tragedies are about families and people that live in highly constructed worlds. Kingdom of Heaven, the city of Thebes, right? Political state structures, the company of Waystar Royco. These are tightly controlled power structures, right? These are the people that are making the world, literally, politically, financially, whichever way you want to twist it. These are the people who are used to having complete control over absolutely everything. And because of that, they think that they have absolute control over literally everything. If tragedy is all about our failure to control the uncontrollable, then it makes sense to be telling stories about the most high contrast versions of these choices and situations, right? The times where the stakes are the highest. Tragedies are about people trying to wrap a glass bottle around an atom bomb. If God doesn't have control over the thing that he literally created, then we have absolutely no business trying to control our children. We have no business pretending we can control our children. No matter how powerful Logan Roy is, no matter how hard he tries to twist and mold and beat his children into the shape of a good successor, it's never going to happen. He will never be able to kill that part of them that makes them individual, that lets them choose to disobey, and his attempts to do so will ruin them and they will ruin his legacy. And that is tragic. Part 5, Roman. Tick. John Milton told the story of creation from Satan's perspective, not because he was trying to make Satan cool, but because he was trying to make Satan human. Unfortunately for him, however, it's not going to be 1667 forever, baby. Oh, no, it's not. And Milton's vision of the devil, emphasizing his initial role in the kingdom of heaven, how he started out like all the other angels and then was kind of smited and jilted and upset about his feudal rights being violated, and how he chose to then go up against the greatest power that there is. Well, that lends itself to a reinterpretation. Or several. Because that Satan, when I say it like that Satan like embodies autonomy. Satan is an individual. He is a person who declares that evil shall be his good, and who would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. Whether he likes it or not, John Milton gave Satan a voice, and people listened. And after a while, Satan's little stunt stops looking like a terrifying mistake and starts to look a lot like an act of agency. And the whole thing starts to feel a lot less cautionary and a lot more romantic, with a capital R. In a piece called Bringing on the Devil on the Romantic Cult of Radical Individualism, Berlin-based critic and writer on contemporary art and cultural theory, Jan Verwoerd, writes, Milton's interpretation of Satan as the fallen but heroic rebel made the devil the idol of all outlaws. As such, the devil has become a prime source of identification for many different performers on the social stage of culture, a romantic model for poets, artists, actors, vamps, divas, dandies, and disintegrated teenagers, and all who like to be known as mad, bad, and dangerous. Wait. Mad, bad, and dangerous? I'm sorry, who does that sound like?
Biz gets to talk about Lord Byron. Biz gets to talk about Lord Byron. Biz gets to talk about Lord Byron. It's the only thing she wants to do.
In the 19th century, Romantic writer Lady Caroline Lamb famously dubbed our resident bisexual disaster Lord Byron mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Byron, whose full name is Lord George Gordon Byron, the 6th Baron, was a prolific writer, sad boy, and serial homewrecker. He was also both the creator of and central inspiration for the literary trope now known as the Byronic hero. Byronic hero. The effect that Lord Byron had on the people around him cannot be understated. I talked about him for so long in my Snape Wives video that people forgot what the video was about. And I cut 6 minutes from that section. Before you ask, yes, I'm gonna do that. I am gonna do that thing. And yes, I am gonna... Wait, stop it. If someone does it first. The Byronic hero is a character marked by traits of supreme loneliness, self-loathing, angst, accompanied by bursts of more redeemable traits like exceptional talent in the arts, or big brain with lots of stuff in it, a soft spot for children and animals, a desire for justice and fairness. They're often martyrs because they're so desperate for death anyway that they'll easily give their life up for you. Roman Roy is a really good example of a Byronic hero character. All of the Roy kids have their Byronic traits, but Roman really fits the bill because he's awful. But he's also very witty. He also has like a soft spot for his family, and he genuinely wants love and connection. Then somebody better give it to him, damn it.
What have I got? I don't know, fucking
Love?
And we're not even going to talk about the funeral. He doesn't care about the failed rocket launch so long as it doesn't hurt his career. But he also advocates for Jerry to get the top spot. And he feels bad for having to fire her the first time and the second time. Kendall is too pathetic to be a Byronic hero. I'm sorry, he is too pathetic. He's the gold standard of pathetic. Everything he does is either cringe.
Well, here we are. My boy Squiggle cooked up this beat for me. Check it.
Or just completely heartbreaking, right?
Oh, you know, it could be what it should be. Nothing at all.
He is not intoxicating. He's not spellbinding in any way. The hottest thing about Kendall Roy is his bank account. Shiv is too mean. She's mean. She's cruel, and she knows that she's being cruel when she does it.
Looks logical.
What?
Cruises, document destruction.
What?
I'm not saying that it should be. I mean, I'm saying you're like family, which is good, but also not family, which is kind of good.
We love her, but Girlie's a bitch. Unironically. And on purpose. Siobhan Roy's redeeming qualities are that she votes left and has a vagina. Both fabulous things, but a Byronic hero they do not make. Even if you love Shiv or Kendall, you kind of want to punch them in the face sometimes. And you don't usually want to punch Byronic heroes in the face, even if you don't like them. Unless you're Caroline Lamb or Robert Southey. Robert Southey, who was poet laureate, which just means head poet, in 1821, publicly announces that Lord Byron and other poets of his vibe were members of a satanic school because of their monstrous combinations of horrors and mockery, their lewdness and satanic spirit of pride and audacious impiety. Impiety just means not giving enough shits about the Lord. The Romantics were a lot of things. Pious is not one of them. So this really worked out very well for everyone involved. Except for Southey, whose reputation never really recovered once Byron got his hands on it, but that is a story for another day. Jeffrey Burton Russell writes, "The devil and radical evil were not subjects that the Romantic philosophers and theologians were particularly concerned with. Materialism, pragmatism, and skepticism of religion were far more important. An enemy of the church is a friend to them," basically. Their tendency was to transpose the Christian God into a symbol of evil, the Christian idea of humanity into God, in the sense that humanity became the ultimate concern, and the Christian Satan into a hero. John Milton made Satan a hero. He just didn't realize that he made him a Byronic hero. It's called the Romantic Era for a reason, baby. Everything gets a sexy little makeover. Narcissism, death, murder, tuberculosis, everything. And this includes the Faust tale. Yes, that is still what this video is about. Because up until now, Marlowe's version of Faust was sort of the most well-known version of the myth, at least in the English-speaking world. And it wasn't really done too much with any amount of seriousness. It was parodied a lot. It wasn't hot on the presses. That is until the Romantics got a hold of it. Specifically, German Romantic poet and Lord Byron enthusiast Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Part of those 6 minutes that were cut from the Byron section of my Snake Wives video were about Goethe, and they were cut because I pronounced his name Goethe. Goethe decides to take a swing at the Faust myth and obliterates it, destroys it like it's a piñata filled with literal gold, knocks it so far out of the park the stars themselves tremble, and he doesn't even finish it. He doesn't even finish it. He drops Faust Part 1 in 1808, and Part 2 doesn't get published until after his death in the year 1832. You thought the Sherlock hiatus of 2014 was bad? You might be thinking that this probably isn't that big of a deal, right? Because didn't I just spend like 2.5 sections talking about how we all know the ending of tragedies and we all know the ending of the Faust tale? It doesn't really matter unless he decided to, I don't know, change the ending. Yeah, so Goethe waits 24 years and then he saves Faust. 24 years, which, if you remember, is the same amount of time that the original Faustus sold his soul for. That is almost definitely a coincidence, though, because Goethe's Faust does not make the same deal with his version of Mephistopheles, who we will call Mephisto. He doesn't really make a deal at all, technically. He makes more of a wager, a bet, if you will. He bets Mephisto that he could endlessly strive and search for truth for all of eternity and never be satisfied. And if he ever says that he is satisfied, Mephisto can have his soul. It's not the only thing that Goethe changes about the Faust tale, though. He also adds in this now sort of infamous episode about a woman named Gretchen who, don't worry guys, is well past her 14th year, in case you were concerned. Faust is like, I would like to get laid, and Mephisto is like, why? But he does as he's told, and he helps Faust land the woman of his dreams by providing him with all kinds of jewels and gifts to woo her with. He gives her a sleeping potion so that she can drug her mother so they can have premarital sex. Don't worry, guys, she's well past her 14th year. They do all of that. Faust gets bored and leaves. Little does he know, however, that he has left her with child, and also her mother is dead, and also I think Faust killed her brother, so she's like alone with this baby, and she goes cray cray, kills the baby, and ends up in jail. Faust finds out and is like, we gotta save her. He goes to save her, and she is like too far gone, refuses to go with him because Mephisto is creepy and she is crazy, and so he has to just like leave her to like rot in jail or be executed or something like that. It's a big old bummer. What does any of this have to do with Succession? I'm glad you asked. I am a detective, and my job here is to notice patterns so that I can desperately try to justify making this video, which means that I just can't ignore the fact that we have two men who make deals with the devil, who are involved with women, who end up pregnant and alone, whilst said man is off reaping the benefits of said deal. It would be an abuse of my privilege as an immortal video essayist to not point this out to you. I will not gatekeep galaxy brain connections, man. To be perfectly honest, however, I do feel that I need to preface this. I am not a person who thinks that Tom loved Shiv more than Shiv loved Tom. I am really not. I'm not saying that it was the other way around, but I am saying that she wasn't willing to sacrifice Tom at the end of season 2, even though it made her look weak to Logan to do so, but he was in fact willing to sacrifice her when it came down to it. But you know, that is a problem for another section. So remember when I said earlier that Tom makes that absolutely batshit decision to show up at the end of season 3 after he has outed Shiv and the Roy siblings' secret plan and betrayed his wife and ruined everything for everyone ever? Remember when I said that? If I was married to Siobhan Roy and I pulled that shit, I would be in a bunker. But I said earlier that we needed to see that moment because that's how Shiv put the pieces together. We needed to see how she felt so that we could feel for her, the catharsis. So we didn't necessarily need that moment, and there wasn't really a storytelling justification for it. There's no reason that Tom would have done that if the writers didn't need for him to be there for dramaturgical effect, right? Wrong. Tom shows up in that moment for the same reason that Faust found out what happened to Gretchen and was like, we must go save her. Because Mephisto is like, why? You did this awful thing to her. Why? And he's like, oh, I need to go do this. Faust shows up to try and save Gretchen. Like, he is not the one who put her in that prison in the first place. Tom shows up to comfort Shiv in that room. Like, he is not the reason she is fucking crying in the first place. And he's believable. He's believable. He doesn't look remotely snaky. He looks more resolved in that moment than he did in his hearing, in any of his business presentations, in any of his business meetings that are his literal job.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
He looks like he feels bad. Probably because he does. Because that's why he's there. He is there because he feels bad. Faust didn't give a shit about Gretchen's well-being until he felt guilty about it. He wouldn't have been anywhere near her if she wasn't in that jail cell. Faust is there for Faust, and Tom is there for Tom. This is about his feelings. He's there because he wants to see the pain that he's caused, or because he, like Faust, actually thinks he can do something about it and like help her emotionally, right? Whether he thinks it's the least he can do, or if he really thinks that he can get away with it, I don't know. But whatever the reason, it's not for Shiv. In season 4, we find out that they haven't talked about it. She did not confront him about this because she doesn't care about his feelings. There was nothing that he could have said or done to make this hurt less. And I bring all this up because there is something here that is in these two Faustian bargain, Devil's Deal stories that is eerily similar to what is arguably the second most famous Faustian bargain, The Picture of Dorian. Excuse me. Oh, you Biz Barkley? Yes. Okay, and this your video essay? Yeah. Right. And you just mentioned what novel? The Picture of Dorian Gray. Right. And what is the section called? This part of the video essay. What did you call that? The Romantic Era. See, yeah, that's actually a pretty serious actually violation under subsection 6, paragraph 25 of the YouTube laws of video essays. And unfortunately, I am gonna have to take you downtown because Dorian Gray was written in 1890, making it part of the decadent movement. So if you could just get... Okay, fine, new section. I wanted to go on a tangent about the ladies anyway. The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is technically speaking from the year 1890 and part of the decadent movement, or maybe the late Romantic period, or the Victorian Gothic, or Gothic horror, or Gothic realism. I don't know and I don't care. Charles Baudelaire said that Romanticism is precisely situated neither in the choice of subject nor exact truth, but in the way of feeling. So it might not be from the officially trademarked Romantic era, but it is still, in my opinion, a romantic novel, lowercase r. Now, there is like a surprising amount of plot in this novel. Beyond the whole, like, picture gets old, Dorian does not thing. So we don't have time to get into all of it, but here is everything that you need to know for this video.
Hi, me from the edit. 2 things. 1, minor content warning. There is a character in Dorian Gray who takes their own life. We mention it briefly, I think 2 times in the next section. I will put a little flash on the screen beforehand, but it is very much brief and in passing. Absolutely no details or anything like that. And 2, Oscar Wilde was like super anti-Semitic and had other problems. We touch on it later, but nobody waits to the end of the video to comment. So for the record, bad dude. We don't like love him.
Dorian Gray, like any good Byronic hero, is hot boy with mommy issues, okay? He is sad little orphan who is also spectacularly beautiful. He was apparently the child of like the most beautiful woman in the land and some poor guy that she was in love with. And then her father had the poor guy killed in a bar fight, and then she died of sadness like a year later. So Dorian got raised by like his mean grandfather. But his mean grandfather, super rich. So he is like a sad, hot, rich orphan, which is the best kind of orphan. We meet Dorian Gray under like a cloud of homoerotic tension because Dorian Gray is also a model, and so he regularly sits for paintings for this artist Basil Howard. It's probably Basil, but it's much funnier to say Basil. So Basil Howard, and Basil is so in love with Dorian Gray. That's not important to what we're doing, but it is important to know. So he crosses paths with a Lord Henry Wotton, who has the energy of like a high school theater teacher who has just come across like a really talented student. He comes in, waxes poetic about the value of youth and beauty and what a bummer it is that Dorian Gray is going to get old and gross and become worthless one day. And then he takes Dorian out on the town. This is what I mean, guys. There is so much plot. Some time passes, I guess, and eventually we find out that our main man, Dorian, is super fucking in love with this woman named Sybil Vane, which is not subtle at all, Oscar. She's an actress, and he loves like watching her act and then immediately decides that he must marry her because that is what you do. And all of the men in his life, for no reason at all, are suspiciously like, no, Dorian, don't get married. But he's Dorian Gray, and panties fall in the man's presence, so eventually he gets her to agree to marry him. Problem is, she is so happy about this, right? She's so ecstatic that, according to Dorian Gray, she can't act anymore, in his opinion. So he cruelly dumps her, right? Dumps her cruelly. Other fucked up shit happens, and eventually she takes her own life. Now, there isn't really a deal-making scene in Dorian Gray the way there is in Faust or Succession or whatever. So we don't technically know when things with his deal were set into motion, but it is implied that this is kind of where it starts. Because this all happens right after Dorian, not so subtly, was like, God, if only that painting could get old and I could stay young. And some god was fucking listening, much to all of our chagrin. So we have these three men, right? These three stories, Faust, Tom, and Dorian, who all make Faustian bargains, right? Then immediately have a problem where they have created versions of these women in their heads. They have fallen for them, reeled them in, and then immediately they are sort of disillusioned and chuck them by the wayside to go reap the rewards of their deal. Dorian Gray literally says out loud that he wanted to put Sybil Vane on a pedestal of gold.
I love Sybil Vane. I want to place her on a pedestal of gold and to see the world worship the woman who is mine. What is marriage? An irrevocable vow. You mock at it for that. Ah, don't mock. It is an irrevocable vow that I want to take. Her trust makes me faithful. Her belief makes me good.
Which, no, it doesn't, evidently. So Sybil Vane dies, and Dorian Gray is like a little bummed about it, but luckily his friends are all like, don't worry about it, man, because, and I quote, she never really lived. The girl never really lived, so she never really died, is what they say. They encourage him to see it as an experience, right? They're kind of jealous that someone would love Dorian Gray that much and that they'll never be loved that much. And they basically come to the conclusion that Sybil Vane never really lived outside of Dorian Gray's experience of her. And what is interesting about this whole section is that it feels like it would be absolutely insane for me to suggest that either of these stories, Dorian and Faust's, are anything like Shiv and Tom's relationship. To suggest that Tom Wambsgans, this man...
I'm carrying a case on my wedding eve.
was even capable of treating Siobhan Roy like a prop feels a bit blasphemous. But I'm gonna do it. Because while there is a very strong argument to be made that she deserved it, because Shiv Roy absolutely used Tom for all that he could give her, and Logan was absolutely right when he said, "You are marrying a man fathoms beneath you because you are afraid to be left," or whatever. We're talking about a woman who cheated on him and then waited till after they said their vows to tell him about it and then ask for an open marriage. Pardon the angle change, but she's mean, right? Shiv is mean. She's selfish, she's kind of cruel, and she is hard as fucking nails. She is not weak by any definition of the word. And yet, she still gets fucked over by this man.
Okay, we here for you. So that might be like, we here for you, man, because you don't need to hear we here.
Yeah, we
also, we here for you.
I wanted to highlight this element of the story because Tom's choice here, his selfish choice, justified or not, is what ends up leading him to being CEO of Waystar Royco. A choice he didn't know he was making. I'm telling you, it's all gonna come together. Because if he didn't do that, if the company stayed in sort of Roy country, even if Logan still dies, the kids had a whole plan and Tom was not part of that plan. He was Shiv's husband and maybe head of ATN still, but honestly, it's only because of him that Logan is able to go through with the deal with Matsson, right? Meaning that there is this third party who comes in, who is then there waiting when Shiv, feeling like her feudal rights have been violated, can now sidle up to Matsson, only for him to use her and squeeze her for everything that she's worth, then chuck her to the side when she's no longer useful to him, and give Shiv's idea of an American CEO spot to Tom. Shiv's idea of an American CEO goes to Tom because Tom fucked her figuratively, and because Tom also fucked her literally, she is pregnant and he is officially ingratiated into that oh so uncontrollable bloodline. The point that I want to make here is that Tom doesn't have to try and be a monster to fuck Shiv over. It takes 3 seasons for us to believe that Tom would ever do this because he has to be pushed to it. Tom, in his relationship with Shiv, chooses selfishness one time. One time he chooses to be selfish, and it wins him the whole game. He barely has to try. He makes one phone call. Shiv tries for 3 seasons to get into that room, and Tom does it in a breath. Because the world that they exist in is built for him. He's an empty suit. Shiv has to deal with the woman thing, and that's a fucking minus. Charlotte Bronte writes in Jane Eyre, "Women feel just as men feel. They need exercise for their faculties and a field for their effort as much as their brothers do. They suffer from too rigid a restraint, too absolute a stagnation, precisely as men would suffer, and it is narrow-minded in their more privileged fellow creatures to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings, to playing on the piano and embroidering bags." None of these men saw the women that they were pursuing for what they were, which is deep, complex individuals who exist outside of their relationship with them. Is Sybil Vane taking her own life because of Dorian Gray the best representation of women? Maybe not. But at the end of the day, that's not her fucking fault. And what Succession does so well with Shiv's story and how it ends specifically is show us that you can be the strongest, most independent, complicated, nuanced woman in the world and still get trapped in a world that was not built for you. Which sounds like a huge bummer. That sounds like the opposite of feminism coming from me, right? But I want to defend that thesis because I know that there is a lot of criticism of Oscar Wilde's work for misogyny. And to be honest, I haven't read enough of it to say. This is the only thing that I've read. But I never got the impression that the way that these women were treated by these men was right. The whole thing feels a lot like Succession, in that these are awful people doing awful things. And maybe it's because I read the book with the intention of doing this video, so I was reading it through the Succession lens, which is a lens of, oh yeah, these are terrible people. We're not supposed to agree with the things that these characters say. I don't know. That's a tangent. You know, I think there's misogyny and I think there's reality. And I think that Succession, the tragedy of it is that it's a reality and that we're not out of the woods, right? Like, we're not done. We're not fixed, right? Everyone in Succession is white, right? Everyone in Succession is white. That's not because they don't think black people can be CEOs. That's because the reality of awful business people like that is that they're usually white.
Bullshit, I'm against racism. Everybody's against racism. What else?
Fuck the patriarchy!
Sophocles' Electra, which, by the way, I have a bone to pick, but we'll get to that. Sophocles' Electra takes a small side character from Aeschylus' Oresteia and gives her the whole play. Electra is the sister of Orestes. In case you forgot, Agamemnon, king, sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to win a war. His wife, Clytemnestra, not happy about that, killed him for that. They have 2 children, Orestes and Electra. Orestes and Electra kill Clytemnestra because of that. Furies, which are like fates, then come after Orestes. Athena comes back and is like, cut it out. That's the whole thing. Electra's like barely in the Libation Bearers, which is the Aeschylus version of this story. And basically, Electra has been miserable since the murder of her father. She is childless and unmarried and constantly being verbally abused by Clytemnestra, and she can't do anything about it. Until, that is, Orestes comes along and is like, hey, we could kill her. In a piece called Electra, Glory Bathed in Tears, Thomas Van Norwick writes, everything that has happened is, in the world created by her powerful emotions, beyond remedy. Her miserable, childless condition, the disgraceful behavior of her mother. Time is measured out in endless repetition of suffering, from which she sees no escape. Only Orestes can break this cycle for her, acting from the outside. By the sheer fact of him being her father, Logan Roy has created a world where Shiv can't escape anything without him. Because at the end of the day, she's got his name, his blood, his wealth. She was born into this cage, and a cage is still a cage regardless of what century it's in.
I have this thing with her, which is like, is it a bit too much, you know?
Okay.
Electra is a problem for those on stage because she will not be quiet and wait for release from her suffering. She also challenges our perception of the logic of the traditional revenge story. Can such a shattered figure, racked by competing emotions of rage, resentment, and shame, ever be restored in a way that would be true to the probing portrait Sophocles creates? What would justice mean to a woman like her?
Orestes is doing this because he was told that he was going to get ugly boils all over his skin if he didn't, right? He's doing this for revenge in, like, the name of his father. But he's also been gone for like 10 years. Electra has been living under Clytemnestra's thumb since the murder of her father and before that. So she is bringing with her into this mess like a whirlwind of emotion. And it challenges the very strict plan that Orestes has for carrying out this murder. Because it's unpredictable. There's too much going on. She is unpredictable. Every time we watch Shiv act on her impulses and self-sabotage, it hurts. Because she is so close. She's so close sometimes. But close is not enough. Dorian's whirlwind of self-indulgence and hedonism, which We'll get to it. His world of self-indulgence and hedonism is not built for the complex reality of a woman like Sybil Vane. The complicated nature of who Sybil Vane is cannot thrive in the fantasy that he has built around himself. Faust's endless fantasy of striving for discovery is not compatible with Gretchen's genuine desire for love and a family and her genuine commitment to her faith. The world that Logan Roy created was built for people like Tom. Logan Roy built a world where his daughter can have anything she wants, so long as she asks for it. And she knows this. She understands the rules of the game. Connor has no problem asking his father for money or support, right? Roman definitely asks for things. Kendall definitely asks for things. As far as I can tell, over the course of 4 seasons, Siobhan Roy does not ask her father for anything except one time. She asks him not to sacrifice Tom. Part 7. Wealth and Debauchery. F. Scott Fitzgerald writes in his 1926 short story, The Rich Boy,
"Let me tell you about the very rich. They are different from you and me. They possess and enjoy early, and it does something to them, makes them soft where we are hard, and cynical where we are trustful, in a way that, unless you were born rich, it is very difficult to understand. They think, deep in their hearts, that they are better than we are, because we had to discover the compensations and refuges of life for ourselves. Even when they enter deep into our world or sink below us, they still think that they are better than we are. They are different."
If you haven't picked up on this metaphor yet, the closest thing that we have in the real world to demon-wielding, world-ending, eternal life, potion-creating magic is money. Buckets and buckets of money. We're talking extreme wealth. Just like Cinderella's fairy godmother definitely doesn't spend a lot of time in CVS looking for the cheapest brand of toothpaste, the Roys don't spend a lot of time in dive bars. They don't wear coats because they go directly from their cars to their jets to their doors. Kendall doesn't have to do park coke.
Ew. Dude. Where did you get this?
It's from a connection. In the park.
They have effectively alienated themselves from the rest of the world, from the real world. And alienation is a big problem for the Romantics. Alienation is a byproduct of individualism, because if you keep breaking apart from the crowd, eventually you're not going to recognize the crowd anymore.
I'm gonna grow up and become a real little boy and learn the price of an egg and do phone sex with my girlfriend like a normo.
Tom is the one who makes the deal with the devil, in the most literal sense, at the end of season 3, but he also functions as a sort of devil Mephistopheles character in his relationship with Greg, who he takes under his wing and sort of guides down the path to moral depravity. Verwoerd writes, "At stake in the dark romantic conception of the devil is a utopian vision of radical individuality, an individuality radicalized through the extraordinary experience and knowledge provided by the devil himself." The devil, in a lot of these stories where he is interacting with humans, tends to take on a sort of mentor-esque role. Just as Tom teaches Greg how to be rich by showing him what to eat and drink, Lord Henry Wotton teaches Dorian Gray about hedonism by A, never shutting the fuck up, and B, giving him a poisonous yellow book, which is almost definitely this book, by French writer and civil servant J.K. It is an 1884 novel. It's called Au revoir. The title is translated as Against Nature or Against the Grain, and refers to the central process in the book in which an aristocrat, completely withdraws himself from society in order to immerse himself in concentrated sensations in private. The book became a central work in the Decadent movement, which we know is where Dorian Gray is from. So the Decadent movement is all about indulgence and art and literature, sexual depravity, and hedonism. Hedonism, from the Greek word hedon, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, meaning pleasure, which, side note, this guy wrote a shit ton about. Granted, his was a lot more about like inner peace and self-contentment, whereas Dorian Gray's is more like fuck bitches, hide their bodies in the woods. Point is, this book that Dorian Gray gets gifted by Lord Henry Wotton is the Eat, Pray, Love of decadent gay literature, and he is described as being addicted to it. In The Psychopathy of Everyday Narcissism, Richard J. Walker writes, in effect, the poisonous book becomes an addictive narcotic, something that he returns to over and over again, and which has poisoned him. This aesthetic intoxication through excessive consumption has its parallel in the alternative world that Dorian Gray inhabits within London. He is consuming this book the way that he is consuming alcohol, sex, food, emotion. Basil at one point goes on and on about all the rumors that he's been hearing about Dorian Gray leaving like a trail of dead boys in his wake. And not because he murdered them, because they are themselves, which, for the record, should surprise no one because Oscar Wilde himself is the one who ruined it for gay Victorians everywhere. I highly recommend this video. Oscar Wilde, not a great dude. And this is something that we see the characters in Succession do as well, not only with Kendall's drug use paralleling his absolutely plummeting mental health, but with Tom, who we find out in the beginning of season 4 after his deal with the devil, but pre-Logan's death has gotten himself a bit of a reputation for being one of the disgusting villains.
Don't call us that.
And yet, I can't say that he looks particularly happy in this moment. In fact, none of the Roys who find themselves in these beautiful places eating fabulous food or enjoying lavish parties ever seem particularly pleased with any of it. The trouble with this constant pursuit of pleasure, this new hedonism, decadent aesthetic hedonism that is characterized by excessive consumption, is that it's more concerned with the satisfaction of desire than it is any kind of genuine happiness. And sometimes the thing that you want is not necessarily the thing that you need. Dorian Gray has to detach from reality in order to engage in this kind of behavior. He has to believe that Sybil Vane never really lived beyond his experience of her, that none of his actions had any effect on anyone he encountered, that it is in the brain only that the great sins of the world take place. Because the only other option is for him to confront his own guilt about the reality of his own existence being something that impacts other people. This is not a feeling that is unique to Dorian Gray or the Roys or any of these characters who make these deals. The only thing that is unique to these characters is the resources that they have to escape it. Throughout the 4th season of Succession, we get two sort of paralleling storylines going on amidst all of the dead dad drama. One of them being finalizing the sale of Waystar Royco to sexy Swiss Army knives, Lucas Matson's Gojo, GoPro. And the other being the election of the President of the United States. So two very low stakes situations. And this presidential election is more or less the 2020 election. So at this point in the story, Logan is dead. Tom is head of ATN, the Fox News-esque station that is Waystar's pride and joy. And he and Shiv are separated with aggression. She is pregnant with his child, but he does not know that. Roman is no longer involved with Jerry because he
fired Jerry and has sort of been on a firing rampage since he stepped in as CEO, since his dad died. And Kendall is going to pee on the floor if someone doesn't tell him that he's a good boy real soon. Things are a mess. And it's the night of the election. US elections are stupid and complicated. Trust me, I vote in them. So I am not going to get into it. But basically, ATN is trying to decide whether or not they can announce on TV that the neo-Nazi won the election. And Roman is all in on wanting to do this because it will help him get what he wants, which is to keep the company under family control. And the others are like, it'll be really, really bad if we get this wrong, because there's reason to doubt the legitimacy of the boats. But he is pushing for it, and they end up doing it.
If we don't call it early and he wins anyway, which is perfectly possible, but without us tonight, think about that.
We push it.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens.
Yeah, we give it to Mencken. Mencken blocks the deal. He's not fucking wishy-washy. He's a guy.
I don't know, dude. I mean, my kids, well, the whole thing.
Ooh, America.
Victor Hugo's 1886 religious epic, La Fin de Satan, or The End of Satan, includes the following. He represents the lack of equilibrium, peace and balance in the cosmos, and the alienation of humanity from its proper repose in love and liberty. Like Satan, we are so wrapped up in our interior world that we cannot see the reality around us. We isolate ourselves from it, though it speaks to us in every tree, bird, and human voice. Roman does not care what happens to the state of the country because he doesn't have to. There is no situation in which he is going to end up in prison or impacted by the laws that are made whatsoever. He can already do all of the drugs that he wants, buy whatever and whoever he wants, treat people however he wants. He doesn't even recognize impact that this will have on other people as being anything real or tangible. It's all just toy soldiers. But obviously this is extremely alienating and ultimately disappointing because he is pushing hard for this specific outcome but has no tangible grasp on the results. And thus he can't conceptualize it or actualize it. There's no way that it's gonna be satisfying because his life is not going to change at all.
Nothing matters, Ken. Nothing fucking matters. Dad's dead, and the country's just a big pussy waiting to get fucked. Action, okay? We can pay for any damages. Let's just jam our fucking heads in the bosom of history and just...
We call it for him. That gives him legitimacy to declare. I mean, we're in bed with him, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I
mean, it'll get ground out in the courts, whatever we say.
The only thing that this is about for him is making sure that Mencken will block the deal. That is the only outcome that matters because that's the only one that affects him.
The guy that's going to answer our calls, the fucking guy printing US dollars. This is all upside.
Apart from the matter of him smashing the country to pieces.
Oh, God, don't...
And so after the funeral, when he is speaking to Mencken and it starts to seem like maybe he's not actually going to follow through on his promise and he's not actually going to block the deal. And when that little sliver of impact that he can process is taken away, the whole night, the whole election nightmare is absolutely meaningless and pointless. The only way that he is able to process and feel this is by throwing himself into a crowd of protesters to be trampled on to a pulp. Interesting, right? This is why Roman is so interesting, because he is like a textbook Byronic hero. And he has such like a fascinating relationship with pain, because he doesn't just like pain, he needs it, both physical and emotional, in both sexual and non-sexual situations. It's not just that he can't get off without being degraded, but like when his dad dies, he has these AI guys
cut together a tape of his dad saying how disappointed he was in him so he can listen to it. And when he does, he smiles. I don't think that there is necessarily an answer to why is Roman Roy like that, capital L, capital T, but I also don't think it matters. I do, however, think that there is something to be explored in that idea that someone born into the heightened unreality that is wealth and an insane, unfathomable privilege, that someone born into that develops a sort of apathy and detachment from the world that is only broken up by experiences of pain and suffering. We're talking about wealth that is practically magic, where all they have to do is put out a hand and whatever they want will all but float into their open palm. And as a result, they don't know how to want. They only know how to need. And because they have everything, they only know how to need more. Dorian Gray had everything. He had money, he had looks, he had high status. What he didn't have was a mommy who loved him. He didn't have a sense of self. Marlowe's Faust equated his soul being separated from his body to being like wiped out of existence. Tom had everything. A high-paying job where he gets to use humans as footstools, a beautiful wife who may or may not actually love him, but he didn't need to throw her under the bus to get out of that one. Tom had everything except for self-confidence, right? Except for a sense of self.
In the company, are you hands-on or more of an overview guy?
Interesting. I guess, well, let me ask you this. What would you value more highly?
Really?
What is crucial to the romantic infatuation with the devil is his relation to excess. The devil not only promises excess, but he also embodies what he promises.
Because I've seen you get fucked a lot, and I've never seen Logan get fucked once.
Logan Roy reeks of power. He is drenched in it. It drips off of him everywhere he goes. And if you are his kids, raised underneath that, and your father loved that power more than he ever loved you, then it must be worth going after. It has to be. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is that maybe he didn't ever love you very much at all. Part 8.
Time for a blood sacrifice.
We mentioned this cruises scandal. Basically, the Waystar Cruise branch was like killing women and paying people off, and it was a big problem. A big poison pill that Tom couldn't help but swallow in season 1. He and Greg work to cover it up, and Greg keeps evidence to blackmail his way to the top eventually. And all seems fine, which is a very bad sign in a tragedy. Inevitably, it starts to come out, as all good secrets do, and there is the infamous court hearing, which is basically like that time that they put the CEO of TikTok at like a table in front of a bunch of government people so they could ask stupid questions.
The only face data that you get, that we collect, is when you use the filters to have, say, sunglasses on your face. We need to know where your eyes are. And
Why do you need to know what the eyes are if you're not seeing if they're dilated?
And Kendall does a decent job, you know, the accusations, but things get worse, right? And Logan comes to the conclusion, for some businessy reason, somebody's got to get fired. And instead of Logan stepping down like, you know, he should have, Logan gathers everyone on his boat, an isolated location, and is like, who's it gonna be?
I mean,
who cares?
I'm more than a sprinkle.
Unbeknownst to them, however, in a galaxy far, far away, another supremely powerful being was gathering all of his little minions to have the same conversation. Re-enter Paradise Lost. Because after Satan's little stunt with the apple, God is like, humanity is just forked forever. What am I gonna do? And basically holds court because somebody's gotta go down with this ship. Now, both of these situations involve two things: justice and mercy. Justice is an eye for an eye. Mercy is you can keep your eye. So God tells his little friends that he is planning to act primarily out of love and mercy, which is good because that's his thing. But at the same time, this is still a court. It's still a kingdom of heaven, and justice must still be served. He told them there would be consequences for eating the apples. They did it anyway. If he lets them get away with it, what are the rest of the kids gonna think? Next thing you know, they'll be committing fratricide. Also, if this is all starting to sound familiar, yes. Now, I wasn't there because I was very busy at the time. So I don't know what God was expecting to happen when he told them not to eat the apple. But evidently he did not think it was going to go the way that it went, because they were in literal paradise and had everything they could ever want and need. Perhaps he just thought they would be satisfied and not fall for another raw vegan influencer scam. Couldn't tell you, but unfortunately he did not consult me beforehand, and so now he's in a pickle because justice just doesn't jive with love and mercy. Justice is a structural thing. Justice is enacted. Love is emotional. It is felt. The constructed versus the familial. I'm telling you. So in both Succession and Paradise Lost, Top Dog tells the crew that in order to fix the problem, a suitable sacrifice must be made. And in both cases, it is the son who becomes that sacrifice. Logan chooses to sacrifice Kendall, which is rough. Because for context, Kendall killed a kid at Shiv's wedding by accident. Well, by negligence. But regardless, he killed a kid. And Logan kind of made it all go away. And so then he spent the entirety of season 2 being Logan's like dead-eyed robot puppy slave, which is a Faustian bargain all its own. Logan sacrifices Kendall, which he shouldn't, because it should be himself. And if it can't be him, it should be Tom. But he won't pick himself because he's a narcissist, and he won't pick Tom because Shiv asked him not to. Why does she do this? Why does she not want it to be Tom? Because, to be perfectly honest, she didn't really care whether or not Tom went to prison for like most of the season.
No, Tom looks logical.
What?
I think part of it is because she is pretty sure she lost the CEO spot when she, had her outburst. But mostly because Tom is honest with her for like 5 minutes.
I wonder if the sad I'd be without you would be less than the sad I get from being with you.
And so she has a choice to make because she is the only person who can save Tom. No one else at that table would do it. And no one else has that kind of pull with Logan besides maybe Kendall or Roman. And Kendall can't have anything he wants because he killed a kid. And Roman doesn't give a shit. And Logan's weakness is that he loves his children. And he will give them what they ask for, even if not especially when it is bad for them. And Shiv knows how to play the game. Shiv knows that she can have anything she wants if she asks for it, which is why she was outside of the company, not because she didn't want it, but because she was trying to prove something. And she is acutely aware, because of her position as a woman in this world, that asking for something is not the same as earning it. And she knows that this is not the best decision. She knows it should be Tom. And if she really wanted to prove to her father in that moment that she is a killer and she can do this job, then she would have to prove that love and family will not get in the way of what is best for the business.
It's the sort of tough choice people need to be able to make.
I can't choose, Dad. Just not Tom. Please. For me.
There's a moment in Antigone where Creon is, Creoning, and his son is like, why should I obey you and support you in your decision to let political power and structure outweigh familial ties and, kill Antigone? And Creon responds with, because I'm your father. Creon tells him to support his choice of structure over family because of family.
This exists because it's a family. We are a family.
So Logan chooses Kendall and God chooses Jesus, right? Wrong. God didn't choose Jesus. He volunteered. Which, for the record, so did Connor Roy. But someone else can make the Connor Roy is the Jesus that never could video essay. This one's already too long, but this is an important distinction. It's an important distinction that Milton made up because it tells us that it could have been anyone. Just like in Succession, how, they're trying to pair together people that have enough weight to make this sacrifice work. The idea is that any and all of the angels were capable of going down, being mortal, dying on the cross, saving humanity, the whole shebang. Any of those angels could have been Greg Sprinkles, but the son chooses to be the one to do it. What's really interesting about this is what it means for God. Milton gives us a world where redeeming all of humanity is not in anyone's job description, which means if no one volunteers, then he's gonna have to pick someone. He says a suitable sacrifice must be made. Man's disobedience not only introduces discord into human history, but it also alienates the father and threatens to set him at odds with himself. What the son's offer does is lets God off the hook. Because if God was a businessman, he could forgive the debt, right? If he was like a creditor, he could just say, we understand, forgive the loan. But he's not. He's a sovereign leader. He's a king in the kingdom of heaven. And so he can't let crimes go unpunished. And what the son's offer does is, one, emphasize that the son and Satan both have free will and can do whatever they want with it. Two, it makes Satan's accusation that God is a tyrant false, right? It doesn't work because he's not a tyrant. He didn't just pick someone. The son volunteered. I will for man's sake leave thy bosom and freely put off glory next to thee, which is the complete opposite of what happens in Succession, which is Logan picks Kendall. And that choice emphasizes Logan's role as a tyrant, emphasizes his selfishness and his control. It makes what Kendall does at the end of the season finale of season 2 ring true. Kendall has spent the last year, months, season, whatever, being on the receiving end of Logan's greatest mercies and his harshest punishments. So he knows better than anyone what it means to be a killer. When Logan appoints him, he is able to go and do exactly what Logan would have done, which is slaughter his father on the pyre.
The truth is that my father is a malignant presence, a bully and a liar. My father keeps a watchful eye over every inch of his whole empire. This is the day his reign ends.
So this should feel better than it does. This should feel significantly more vindicating, more like a milestone has been hit, more like a growth point, right? Character development, good for Kendall, but like it doesn't. If this were any other show or any other kind of storytelling, it would feel that way. Even if they were still awful people, this would be the I'll make a man out of you moment where she climbs the pole, right? This would be Rocky on the steps. This would be a moment where we are proud of Kendall. And then the whole third season would be him finally coming out on top and finally earning his father's respect by going toe-to-toe with him and proving that he's his own man. And they would make up and have like a I understand you moment on Logan's deathbed, and Logan would die and Kendall would ride off into the sunset a powerful and better man. But this is Succession, and Succession is a tragedy. Part 9 is Logan Roy the Devil. Yes. Part 10, the devil is really just vibes anyway, because Logan Roy certainly functions like a devil in, you know, the world of Succession. That's not a secret. He is the one that everyone is making all of these deals with, at least the deals that work out in their favor. He is a dissenter, right? He definitely created his own world. He does not adhere to traditional Christian morality. He is cruel and powerful and lustful and indulgent and smart, but has a soft spot for himself. I mean, his kids. But I did also compare him to God for like most of the last section. So what is going on? Why doesn't this video make any sense? Let's go back to Russell's book and remember that the devil is inextricably linked to that fundamental problem of evil. Evil being Welcome to the ethics section. What is evil? For Milton in Paradise Lost, keeping in line with the kind of Christian moral values, evil is empty, it's mad, unreal, focused on unreality, and self-defeating. Terry Eagleton wrote a whole book on it, and he writes that evil is destruction, right? The opposite of creation. Webster says things like morally reprehensible, sinful, wicked, arising from actual or imputed bad character or conduct. There are also a few things that come up consistently when you are looking into what in God's name evil is. Things like nuclear weapons, concentration camps, the Holocaust, war in general, slavery, genocides, these like massive, large scale, kind of incomprehensible evils. And then you also have things like the murder of Gabriel Fernandez is the first thing that comes up in my mind when I think about evil, right? The torture of Junko Fruta, Eric Tillman, Mike Brown, right? Matthew Shepard, violence that feels pointed. You also have things like cancer and illnesses, right? Tsunamis and earthquakes and wildfires, right? These natural, uncontrollable evils that don't feel necessarily attributed to human action. Climate change is real, but you know what I mean. Human-caused planetary destruction and corporate planetary destruction, definitely human in the human-caused evil category. But also, there have always been tsunamis.
I guess I'm a climate denier.
The problem is that Logan Roy does not fit into any of those categories very neatly. What he builds, however, does pave the way, or at least open the doors, for some of those more easily recognizable evils. I mean, they wield billions of dollars. They pick the President of the United States. They run the news, which, you know...
It's new.
It's new. That said, he did also make his employees get down on their hands and knees and oink like literal pigs, which...
Oink for your sausages, piggies! Shh. Oink for your sausages, piggy. Oink, oink.
Feels kind of senseless and cruel for cruelty's sake. Feels without justification.
Too effing slow. I'll get you a booby prize. Eat up, piggies!
But is it evil? Oh god, we have to talk about Kant. Ugh. Okay. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 and died in 1804. And the thing you need to know about Kant is that he really thought universal morality was a thing. He was big on these things called categorical imperatives. You don't need to know this. They're basically super laws that make so much sense. We have to do them or else the island will explode. I wrote like a bunch of paragraphs on this, but I don't feel like reading them. It is late and this video is long. Basically, Kant's whole thing is that radical evil comes when you decide to rewire your brain so that you can do the selfish thing and whatever's best for you instead of the right thing. Whatever Kant said the right thing was. You flip it. You restructure the moral hierarchy in your brain. That's why it's radical, because you're like, no, I'm doing the right thing. You declare evil to be your good. Assuming that Elon Musk knows that he could give me $100,000 and it would be the morally right thing to do, right? And he does not do that. That is him making a morally bad choice, per Kant. Every day that Elon Musk convinces himself that he is going to find a better way to redistribute his wealth, every day that he tells himself that not giving me $100,000 is the right thing, that's radical evil. Lying to yourself is radical evil. Believing that you are doing the right, just thing when you're really just being selfish is radical evil because you don't even know the difference anymore. In Katherine Gillan Martin's The Reason of Radical Evil, she talks about how these characters, like Milton Satan, activate evil by believing that they can become godlike. From a Christian perspective, God understands evil in a way that humanity cannot because God allows evil. And what Martin is arguing in this piece is that, in part, evil comes from the desire to play God and the illusion, right? Lying to yourself and telling yourself that you can do what God does when you can't.
I'm a great revolutionary.
Remember when we talked about tragedies and how one of the fatal mistakes that our characters make is believing that they have omniscience, believing that they know everything they need to know?
I fucking know things about the world or I wouldn't turn a buck. Not necessarily nice things.
The same way that you can't drop into a crossroads without coming from somewhere. When we're talking about evil as it pertains to the devil and deals with the devil, evil had to be created from something. It had to come from somewhere.
I hate to say this because I love you, but you're kind of evil.
Terry Eagleton writes that evil believes that it is entirely self-dependent, conjuring itself up out of nothing. But the truth is that it is not its own origin. Something has always come before it, and this is one reason why it is eternally miserable. We know that Logan was not born into wealth and comes from a violent household with a history of abuse. We hear a story from Ewan about the guilt that he felt surrounding his sister's death. These are all harsh realities that definitely explain, why Logan might be the way that he is. But at the end of the day, Logan didn't build an empire and use the proceeds to fund medical research, did he?
He gave away a few million of his billions, but he was not a generous man. He was mean.
He didn't come from his abusive home and have children that he showered with love and affection and understanding.
No, not with your father. He never saw anything he loved that he didn't want to kick it just to see if it would still come back.
Love? You come for me with love.
Calling your daughter a coward till she cries? Big man.
The act of evil, Martin suggests, becomes a way of relieving pain. Characters who are already on the road to evil, who have already subverted their morality and are actively ruling their own little universes, not only derive pleasure from the physical and psychological pain of others, but use it to compensate for their deep feelings of anxiety, envy, or shame.
You're so fucking jealous of what you've given your own kids. You can't handle it. You can't work it out.
The final stage of true degradation, Martin suggests, is reached once all material, political, or other social gains becomes pretext for radically evil acts. Logan makes Roman go back and offer a guy less money for a deal that was a good deal because he wants to be cruel about it. Logan's behavior doesn't have justification, right? Not a real one, anyway.
Barbecued him live, huh?
Don't fuck with me! No, don't fucking touch me!
Being cruel to his kids, he might argue, is his way of making them tough.
Are you gonna fucking cry? Kendall, are you fucking crying?
Trying to prepare them to take over the company, but we already know that that's not possible. We learned from Paradise Lost that you can't control people even if you made them.
You are a fucking nobody.
It's a false narrative. It's a willful illusion of omnipotence coupled with a big ol' scoop of free will, supercharged with literal devil Satan magic or extreme wealth. There is a fly, I'm so sorry about it. If Logan Roy has chosen evil, he has decided to become the god of his own little false reality. The question is, what does that mean for the children that he raises there? Besides the fact that wanting for nothing means needing for everything, what kind of poisonous world does a man like Logan Roy create when he declares evil to be his good? What kind of cyclical, recursive hell does he build? And does the poison drip through? No. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have exactly 1 hour to finish this. Part 11, poison drips through. So in a world where Logan Roy is God, and his children start behaving like monsters, start choosing evil, who is really to blame for that? Is it these kids, or is it the man who planted the tree? I told you earlier that I had a bone to pick with Elektra. This is that bone. Elektra does not want to kill her mother because she was in love with her father. The Elektra complex, as it is colloquially understood, is girls who are in love with their fathers, who are jealous of their father's partners because they get their father's attention. Fuck off. Fuck off. Elektra did not want to kill her mother because she was in love with her father. She wanted to kill her mother because her mother killed her father and was sleeping in his bed with another man. Clytemnestra is her mother, and is cruel to her, is so mean to her. She taunts her. Orestes is gone. Iphigenia, dead. And she is an unmarried woman with no children in a world where that's not ideal to be. So what is the point of her living piously in good graces with the gods when everything around her is dog shit? She knows that she is behaving badly. She's ashamed of it. She says, I know that I act wrongly for one my age and against my nature. She says that she feels forced to act this way because of her mother's hostility. And worst of all, she sees herself as being like her mother for doing it. She says, when surrounded by evil, one must practice evil. In Birthrights, Freedom, Responsibility, and Democratic Comportment in Aeschylus's Oresteia, Elizabeth Markovitz writes, Aeschylus presents for the audience the intergenerational tensions that characterize life, setting up the drama and resolution in terms of conflicts between those who have held power in the past and those who have arrived to demand their share of it. Succession is centered around the Roy kids coming to demand their share.
I'm the eldest boy!
Their feudal right. Elektra is about justice, right? And the character of Elektra is not a simple or easily digestible character. She is one in a long chain of violence and justice and violence and justice and violence and justice. And that's the point. At the end of the Oresteia, right, at the end of the third play, the Eumenides, Orestes is losing his mind and on the run because he killed his mother. And Athena comes back from the beginning. Athena comes back and she spares Orestes and basically is like, cut it out. Cut it out with the blood feuds. Cut it out with the revenge killings. Enough. But we don't have that in Succession. We don't have gods. We just have Logan Roy. And when Logan Roy dies, there is no one to come in and put an end to the blood feuds and put an end to the violence. There is also, however, no longer anyone there to hold up the edges of this illusion. Because the rich live in a different world. It's an unreality. They live in a bubble, a detached, insane bubble. And when Logan Roy dies, that bubble bursts. And reality is there, and there is just no way that Shiv Roy was ever going to vote to hand over Waystar Royco to either of her brothers in the light of day. Even if it was the better option, there was no way that was going to happen. She was never going to do that because it wouldn't have been fair. This is a tragedy, and Kendall Roy is not the eldest boy. They were all promised this. They all did their time under the thumb of Logan Roy, and whether she is valid or not in her being upset about this, she thinks that it is her birthright. She feels just as entitled to that CEO spot as either of them do. She was never going to give it up.
Shiv? Shiv?
Shiv voting no at the end of Succession is probably the greatest act of agency that we see in the entire series. And to prove it to you, we have to go back to the crossroads. Because at the end of Oedipus blinds himself. But he's not the only one. Goethe's Faust also blinds himself. Faust blinds himself after he tells Mephisto to do what he's got to do to get him the land that this old couple are living on. And so Mephisto kills the old couple. And then Faust is like, what? I didn't tell you to do that. And Mephisto's like, I'm the devil. What did you think I was going to do? And Faust tries to renounce magic, blah, 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 blah. He blinds himself or is blinded by like a ghost of care or something like that. They do this because the bubble has burst. Reality has set in, and they have been put face to face with the consequences of their actions. I said earlier that we can control our bodies, but we cannot control who makes our bodies. And the act of blinding themselves is an act of agency, is a way of taking control over your being, taking responsibility for the choices that you made and the choices you didn't know you were making. Shiv's choice at the end of season 4 can definitely be seen as she knew it would be Tom, so she wanted to stay close to the action. But I disagree. I think that she gave up any chance of like pushing Kendall out or taking over or just like keeping the business in the family alone. She gave up her family, right? Like how long do you think it's gonna be before the three of them talk again? She gave up the last shot that she had at ever running the thing and resigned herself to what I think we can agree is her worst nightmare, being the wife. She needs power over Tom, right? The girl does not play second fiddle. She knows how women are treated in this world. When was the last time the wife took over for the CEO? But she's in that boardroom and she can't stomach Kendall. And she sees the kind of people that they are awful people. And maybe it's better to just cut the tumor out and go with the empty suit.
Hey, we are bullshit.
We are not bullshit.
We are bullshit. You are bullshit. You're fucking bullshit, man. I'm fucking bullshit. She's bullshit. It's all fucking nothing. Man, I'm telling you this because I know it, okay? We're nothing.
Oedipus effectively sort of martyrs himself by blinding himself and then going off into the dark or whatever. And because of that, arguably, his daughter, Antigone, is then capable of that same martyrdom. She witnessed it, so she can now do it. Clytemnestra was a woman who was capable of murdering her husband, and so she raised children who were capable of murdering her. The devil is going to raise devilish children.
I love you, man, but you're not a serious person.
I love you, but you are not serious people.
Logan Roy is a bad man. He chose to do bad things. He may have had his reasons, but when you are a person like that, a devilish person filled with shame and self-loathing, when you are a person who chooses evil, a person with holes inside of themselves, and you raise children with holes inside of themselves, then yeah, the poison is gonna drip through. Stay with me, I'm not done. Come on, you didn't think I was gonna leave it there, did ya? No. Part 12. You can definitely suck poison out. Fucked up people raise fucked up children. End of there's nothing we can do is not the message. Instead, we're going to end this by talking about what it is I think we are supposed to learn from Succession, which is nothing. I think that if Succession had a singular message or lesson to be learned from it, then there wouldn't be half as many video essays on it, okay? There wouldn't be. I saw a video essay on how it's about climate change. I don't think we're supposed to learn anything from Succession. I think we're just supposed to feel, to pity and fear, have catharsis, all of these things that come with tragedies. If Succession is trying to do anything, it's tell a true story. Show us what the world looks like, what family looks like in its most high contrast form, where every physical and financial need is taken care of, and there are no excuses or explanations or justifications. In a perfectly constructed world, what does family look like then? The same, I think. The answer is that it looks the same. It looks fucked up and mean. It's that thing that gets under your skin like nothing else in the world. And it's also the only thing that you might be willing to fight for, fight with, and fight over. Logan Roy was the devil, and he was also God, and he was also their dad. Succession is impactful and will last, I think, for the same reason that Paradise Lost has lasted and been as impactful as it has. For the same reason that these Faustian bargains are getting told over and over again. According to Russell, whether the devil exists depends upon one's definition of the devil and the conceptual framework within which one is operating. But the ideas presented in the Faustian bargain are universal, because I think we all have the capacity for evil within us, and we want to know what happens when we choose it. This whole video started because I was trying to figure out why I felt like if I was offered $1 million to keep my mouth shut about some shit that the Roys did to me, I can't say with full confidence that I wouldn't take it. And I wanted to know why. Why is the list of things that I wouldn't do for a large amount of money significantly smaller than I feel comfortable telling you? What is it about these worlds that are created by the wealthy that is so tempting? Morality seems like chunk change. Why do I feel so ready to make a Faustian bargain, to sell my soul, to choose evil? Mary D. Harris writes, "All men have wished for more than they had, and every crime committed has involved selling one's soul to the devil. Indeed, what is sin but giving in to the powers of evil?" The Roys have everything, but they don't have everything. People are always saying that there is no one to root for in Succession, or everyone is unlikable, and I disagree with that completely. I think that they are very likable and also awful. I think both of those things are true. Elizabeth Markovitz writes,
"Individuals always come from somewhere, a fact that often limits their range of choices and freedom. But they also train an ability to act, an ability that can only make sense through an admission of agency in spite of the seeming compulsions of inheritance.
In my last video, I said that being a billionaire was a selfish choice, and I stand by that. It's a choice made by a person who can, in fact, make another choice, whether they are admitting it or not. These aren't different kinds of people. These aren't people with any special skills or superhuman ability. They're not different people in our world. They are our people in a different world. One that is not real.
Man, come on, it's fucking nothing. It's bits of glue and broken shows, fucking phony news, fucking... Come on.
When we talk about how someone behaves morally in the real world, we talk about their character. Who are you on paper? What would your actions look like if we had all of the information, if we were looking at the crossroads from the bird's eye view? Our character is a result of sustained attention to the world and coherence to our intentionality. How we behave morally is a product of how we are treated morally, how we exist in the world, how much attention we can pay to the things around us, the people around us, and how much effort are we putting into the choices that we are making every single day. This has been very convoluted, to say the least. Trying to tie together Greek tragedies, Faustian bargains, and Succession didn't work. There is no unique, perfect little bow thesis for this video. Maybe there will never be a thesis again. I don't know. But I think that what we can take away from this is if the devil, literal, metaphoric, religious, secular, ideological, whatever you want to call it, if the devil is one of the many ways that we collectively deal with and process evil in our world, and if we all have free will and thus the capacity for evil, and we use metaphor and storytelling to explore morality, then when we are making these deals with the devil, who are we really making a deal with? Ourselves. Yep, that's it. Brilliant. Well done, class. You're free to go. I have to leave the house in 5 minutes, but thank you for watching. Thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are wonderful. Thank you to the patrons who helped me edit some of the script. As usual, leave a comment with your perspectives. There's probably already a pinned comment down there of all the things that I got wrong. I will see you next time. And the next one is going to make a lot more sense, I promise.
Like Oedipus desperate, I ran the gauntlet back home. Endlessly, vengefully, always pretending we're not overdue on a blood loan. And I never wallow in the sins of my father. Family's the enemy of war. Time's only one cold wash down with the bottle. Alas, I exist no more. And how to forgive all the people who lived in these hallowed halls time has swept bare. The sheets have worn thin, soaked with all that I've been. I was never brave at all.